But for today, we are honored to have Myra Hart with us. Thank you very much for joining us, Myra. I know that you had a very tight schedule, but Myra is a full professor in the School of Environmental Studies at Queen's University. Her international reputation is for her multifaceted collaborative investigation into science studies and environmental issues. She has published on a diversity of topics relating to waste, science studies, material engagement with the environment, and in humanities, in humanism. Hard represented Canada at the G7 Microplastic Paris meeting in 2019 and earned the Queen's Excellence in Research Prize in 1915. Waste is one of the key concepts of her research, and today we are here to hear about one of her recently published book, A Public Sociology of Waste. After her presentation, we will have a Q&A session, and I would like to encourage everyone who has any question or comments during her presentation, please write them down in the chat bar, and I will take care of them. Now I think I have set the stage, and Myra, please take it over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And first of all, I really apologize that the date got changed, and I'm sorry, it was my own scheduling problem. So thank you to everyone who was able to make it today. So just before we get started, I just want to give a small caveat that I'm at home, which means I am with my dog. And if someone rings the doorbell or someone goes by with a dog, you might hear barking in the background, and I apologize. I think we're all probably familiar with this now with the COVID pandemic, but anyway, it's just my little apology in advance. So let me share my, I have a PowerPoint, and I just wanted to share, let's see, where are we here? Hang on. Now, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, great. Okay, today I'm going to talk to you about a book I wrote that was published in 2022, I think, called Public Sociology of Waste. And this book came about because the series editors contacted me to ask if I would write about public sociology. It's something that I've written about before, and I'm quite interested in public sociology, and I have one degree in sociology, which is my PhD, and so I took on the challenge, and this is the book. This is the book that I wrote. So I'm going to just really go through the book and talk to you about what my central arguments in the book are and what kinds of evidence that I use. I'll likely forget some things, so I certainly welcome any of your questions and comments. I've been studying waste for quite a number of years now, and it's a topic that I'm very passionate about and very interested in, and I can see from the participants that some of you are in waste as well. So I look forward to a really good Q&A period after this. Okay, so I am Canadian, and so this is an important thing for us, and perhaps from wherever you are. From wherever you are sitting today. So this is a land and life acknowledgement. I'm a white settler Canadian who benefits from ongoing settler colonialism. Queen's University, where I work, is situated on unceded Anishinaabe Nation and Haudenosaunee Nation territories, belonging to the First Nations of the Confederation of First Fires and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I respect the fact that I am an uninvited guest on these lands, and this is unceded territory that Queen's University has not acknowledged in any monetary or other than symbolic ways, such as the one that I've just given. Okay.
Sorry, very sorry for interruption, but are you sure that you? I mean, we are still seeing the first a slide of your presentation. Are you still there, or you have changed your slides? Because
I've changed. Oh, I've changed it. Do you not see this? Do you not
no,
see?
unfortunately, no. And also, it is not in full screen. Your
Oh,
presentation.
okay. Does this, is this any good?
Uh,
You
Nothing.
see the second one?
No.
Okay, let me stop the share.
Okay.
I apologize. Sorry. Gee, I thought I had completely I thought I had well done this when the COVID experience. Uh, Hang on. Let me try just a second. Uh, Let me try sharing this. Sorry, bear with me, everyone. Uh, okay, can you see my
Okay.
second slide
Yes,
now?
yes, yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for pointing that out. I would have hated to have gotten further in without it being corrected. So thank you for that. And I'm sorry for my low technological skills. Um, okay. So what I want to really focus on today is how waste can be a public problem rather than an individual problem. So I want to just start by saying waste can be conceived of, and typically is conceived of, as being a very simple thing. It's everything that we throw away, and that's it. Um, but of course, when you sort of pick down materially and symbolically and linguistically, we find that waste is actually a very, very complex topic. And a couple of examples. So, for instance, France is the largest net importer of hazardous waste. It's not. Countries in these so-called globalized South. Another example of waste complexity is that Annex 7 countries, as defined by the Basel-Ban Convention, which include Europe and OECD countries, they export more electronic waste to each other than to non-Annex 7 countries. So non-Annex 7 countries are countries like the Philippines, countries in Asia, etc. So waste is actually very, very complex in how it is produced, how it is moved around the planet, how it is disposed of, and how it is otherwise uh, treated. The waste that we see, the waste that we have contact with on a daily basis is a very narrow proportion of the waste that the globe produces. So, and it consists of municipal solid and liquid waste, everything we flush down our toilet and everything we put in either recycling or disposal, or everything that we compost. So really, when we're talking about waste is what some of us don't see. It's really about resource extraction, manufacturing, distribution, retail, recycling, and disposal. Now, of course, there are millions of people on the planet who do entirely understand um, what waste really is, and see far more than the municipal solid and liquid waste that most people in urban centers and affluent places do not see. And I, of course, want to stress that we don't see it not because we don't want to, but because it is taken from the public's view through very purposeful mechanisms and techniques that I'll talk about. So, what we think of as waste, in other words, is what is on full display. Things like, outraged discussions and members of parliament talking about, how bad plastic straws are for the environment, or these single-use coffee pods. The waste that we don't tend to talk about, the waste that we know very little about and are very much encouraged not to know anything about, is the waste that's on the other side of the screen, which is resource extraction waste, which by far constitutes the most waste on our planet. So really public sociology, it really examines what's happening here, and then how public sociology might intervene into these discussions, what I'm going to talk about in a second around framing. So public sociology examines these societal structures that interact with materialities to structure people's lives. So what I mean by that is how things like waste management structures how we have contact with PCBs, um, um, uh, derivatives in plastics, etc., and how our behaviors and how we think about waste and things like hygiene and cleanliness and contamination, responsibility, all of these things, how these things interact. And I argue in the book that waste is very much a global problem whose lived experiences really vary substantially depending on structures of settler colonialism. And I went on after the public sociology to write this book called Extracting Reconciliation with one of my former master's students, Hilary Predko, who's wonderful. And this book is really about the connection between waste and colonialism and settler colonialism. So if you're interested in that, then it's just to say that I'm not really going to focus on that too much today, but I can certainly address any comments or questions that you might have about that. So one of the things that I think is powerful about public sociology that it can really potentially connect individual experiences to structures in society and how these structures really influence the way in which we live our lives and understand our lives. I am not a psychologist, and my work very much steers away from psychology. And as you'll see, I'm not really interested in individual behaviors at all. So you know, again, the strength of and the potential of public sociology with regard to waste is that it can frame waste as a socio-ethical issue and not a techno-scientific or a behavioral issue. So that's really the reason that I agreed to write this book was precisely for that, because public sociology allows me to frame waste in the way that I think it needs to be framed. So one of the things that's really central or quite popular in public sociology analyses is to talk about framing. And I'm just using Entman's definition here. Framing is selecting some aspects of perceived reality and making them more salient to promote a particular definition, causal interpretation, moral evaluation, and or treatment recommendation. And as we know, people tend to accept frames that correspond to their already existing understanding of the world. And this is really important because the way that industry and government work in tandem, they prime us to much more readily accept particular frames around waste than other frames. So, for instance, the reality that that most electronic waste is being traded within Annex 7 countries, including Europe and the OECD countries, which includes Canada and the US, is a frame that is less easy to accept because it doesn't really correspond with our existing understanding of the world. And our existing understanding of the world, of course, when I'm talking about waste, has been already framed in particular ways that leads us to readily accept news items that talk about, you know, electronic waste in China, etc. So, I mean, we know this from my neighbors to the south. You know, that Fox News and First America frames the problem in very different ways than CNN and MSNBC frames the problem. And so once we have a particular frame of what the problem is, that directs us. It sets the parameters for how we're gonna how we think we need to respond to a particular problem. So So a lot of what I talk about in the book is what I call the problem of amplification. And this is about framing waste as an individual responsibility. So the 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 frame goes like this. Individuals and households produce waste. That means individuals and households can and should, there's a moral imperative, of course, built in, should resolve the problem. The problem is framed, our global waste problem is framed as a problem of municipal solid waste. Those coffee pods or plastic straws or whatever it is that we're talking about, like the packaging from all of that takeout that people or takeaway food that people were getting during the pandemic. Except that my own research, which backs up what numerous waste researchers have meticulously researched, is that almost all of our global waste is produced by the resource extraction and manufacturing industries, by far, almost all of it. So when we're talking about municipal solid and liquid waste, we're really talking about, at maximum 3% of global waste, and yet that's what we really, really focus on. And we focus on that. It's framed as being the problem because the globe is structured through neoliberal capitalism. So neoliberal capitalism, as I argue in the book, creates this problem of amplification. The neoliberalism focuses on so-called individual choice plus so-called individual responsibility. It frames individuals as sort of, entrepreneurial and responsible and all of these things. And the capitalism part is really about how capitalism and industry very much benefits from this problem of amplification, because it puts the financial onus onto individuals and households and away from themselves. And so the framing of individuals and households as being the problem creates the problem itself. And the problem that it creates is that we think that we need to address, or that we can address, waste issues through individual level actions. And this is a big problem. So industry has very much created the problem of amplification, and governments have largely, not perhaps all governments, I don't want to generalize, but I can certainly talk about the Canadian government and the US government and governments in Europe, have very much gone along with this problem of amplification. So some sort of obvious examples, which you probably already know about, the recycling logo was created by a guy called Gary Anderson, it was part of a competition for what symbol to use for the first Earth Day in 1970. And of course, it was sponsored by the Container Corporation of America. And that symbol has become symptomatic of how to deal with waste at an individual and household level. The ecological footprint calculator, it was developed by two academics in the early 1990s at University of British Columbia, and British Petroleum quickly invented an advertising campaign around this. And the campaign is really about telling consumers that it was time to go on a low carbon diet, with this idea that you can offset, you fly somewhere, but that you can offset it by giving money to some again, company that's going to then like plant trees somewhere else in the world, or that sort of thing. And it gives individuals this idea that individuals can halt climate change if they have the will, if they have the moral imperative. This one is my sort of favorite one because it comes from a time when, when I was a child and watched TV in Canada. And I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but it's known as the Crying Indian. And it was an advertisement that featured this gentleman here who called himself Iron Eyes Cody. And it's basically, you can find it on YouTube, and it's basically a commercial in which this individual is paddling down some unknown river in his supposed birch bark canoe, and he comes ashore, and as he comes to shore, he stands there, and a white woman throws some takeaway McDonald's or whatever out her window, and the trash lands on his feet. And it does a close up on his face, and a single tear runs down his face. And the byline, the voiceover says, "People start pollution, people can stop it." This advertising campaign, and it wasn't the only advert, subsequent ones came out, was the invention of a consortium of American beverage companies who came up with this campaign, because they were wanting to move from glass bottles for Coca-Cola and Mountain Dew and all of those beverages to plastic bottles. Why? Because plastic bottles would increase their profit because they're lighter, and so that means that they're less heavy in the trucks, and then the trucks are using less fuel, and so they can make more profit. And it also, because with the glass bottles, there was a deposit system, and people could bring back their bottles, and then they would be sent to the companies, who then had to wash them and deal with them, etc. By moving to plastic, they took out the reuse, and they didn't have to pay for that reuse. So what this campaign did, of course, was it diverted attention away from plastic packaging and towards litter. And this is where you get the Keep America Beautiful campaign, which I don't know if you're aware of, or you have that wherever you are. But Canada has something similar. It's not called Keep Canada Beautiful, but it's basically where the focus is on public litter. And so people volunteer their time, and they clean up garbage that's at the side of highways or freeways, and or maybe they volunteer their time to clean up parks and that sort of thing. And that's perfect, right? Because it's free labor. It focuses very much on individual level garbage. It absolves the manufacturing companies who make all of this packaging, and it comes with this moral imperative. So again, it diverts attention from all of the pre-consumption waste, which is the vast bulk of waste, and it puts it onto post-consumption individual behavior. And so this is why I argue in the book that recycling itself is the diversion. Recycling isn't diverting, but it is the diversion, and the diversion is away from who's creating the waste and who should take responsibility for it. So I just give these little examples. Recycling has been around for at least 2 or 3 generations now in its present form, and which I can talk about in the question and answer if you're interested. And it really takes on this idea that like this logo of this, like children, we spend a lot of time educating children in schools. We've incited the education system to go along with this idea that recycling is the way to resolve our waste issues. It comes with this moral imperative, and of course, it focuses on the individual level. So I just want to go through some of the reasons why recycling it works in the sense that it's really great for industry and government, and it has really negative impacts on the environment. So if you're interested in what's really good for industry and capitalism, then recycling is excellent. And if you're interested in the environment and environmental degradation, then recycling is not the way to go. But it's very, 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 very popular. And it really is the number one way in which people talk about resolving our global waste problem, is to increase the volume of recycling and the quality of recycling, for instance, in things like, chemical recycling and, plastics recycling, etc. So I'll just sort of briefly go through the problems here. So, and these are a few of the problems. In the book, I detail more of them, but anyway, here are the sort of some of the greatest hits. So really, recycling, I think, as we're increasingly realizing, is really disposal by another name. It's recycling as a for-profit industry, so that means that things are only going to be recycled if companies profit. And so if they can't make a profit out of whatever the material is that is in the recycling, whether that's cans or different kinds of plastics or cardboard or paper or whatever it is, it simply gets diverted back into the disposal, which in Canada means landfilling, and in Europe it means some landfilling and incineration and waste to energy uh, um, facilities. So, or of course, exporting it. Uh, Recycling companies are often owned by disposal companies. Like Waste Management Incorporated is one of the largest waste managing corporations in the world, and they own recycling companies. And so they're the ones who entirely control whether a material is going to recycling or disposal. And even if we had perfect recycling, it would only really address about a third of municipal solid waste, let alone the 97 to 99% of our global waste problem. Recycling definitely doesn't meet demand. It cannot meet demand. And here is I want to acknowledge Dr. Romain Garcier at ENS in Lyon, who gave me this slide. And it's really an excellent slide that looks at demand versus the recycling potential for electronics. And as you see, our current demand is increasing in an exponential rather than linear fashion. If we took all of our electronics and all of our what are known as hibernating stocks, which are all those electronics that we keep in our homes that we don't know what to do with, so we haven't thrown them out yet, or we haven't tried to recycle them yet, they're just sitting there. If we took all of that globally, that's the green part of the graph, which is our theoretical recycling potential. The current demand is much higher, and then as we increase our demand for electronics, there's no chance at all that all the recycling of electronics in the world cannot keep up with the demand for electronics. So recycling doesn't close that loop. Recycling has, really negative environmental impacts. One of the most obvious ones is that when we dispose of something, when we send it to a landfill or to a waste energy or other incinerator, they tend to be closer to the source of the waste. And when we recycle, the reprocessing facilities, and of which there is a minimum of one, sometimes depending on the material, they have to go through 2 or 3 reprocessing, which won't be in the same place. These reprocessing facilities are fewer and far between, and they may be located further from municipalities and landfills. So I give in the book the example of my university very proudly states that it recycles polystyrene, which is that white stuff that that flat screen TVs are packed in. And when you actually trace, if it went to a landfill, the polystyrene would travel a much smaller distance than what actually happens to it, which is that it leaves Kingston, Ontario, where my university is situated. It goes up to North Bay, which is much further north than Kingston, and then it gets trucked to Montreal, where it's put on container ships, and it is shipped to South Korea and the United States, where it's made into inferior products, and then is shipped back to us, and then put on trucks again and distributed to stores where we buy things that are of poorer quality and have sort of one single use. So I did a calculation that we're talking about, well over 1,000 kilometers just in that first part of the reprocessing. If you sort of trace any given object, the carbon emissions of the transportation of recycling very quickly outdo any environmental good that can be gained from recycling. Another sort of red herring is trying to get rid of single-use plastics. They really constitute a very small proportion of plastics for sure. And if you look at this graph on things like land occupation and fossil energy, global warming, etc., using recycled content has a net negative impact rather than a positive impact on the environment. So you have to really look at what it is you're talking about in terms of which particular plastic, where it's going and what its actual environmental effects are. I use the example of paper. Recycling paper creates hazardous waste. So in taking out the dyes and then re-dyeing the paper, it creates this sort of sludge, which is quite difficult to dispose of and has to be disposed of in specially designed, engineered hazardous waste landfills. And recycling, of course, like plastics, requires using new cellulose fibers, which means using more trees, et cetera, et cetera. So again, compared to reducing or reusing or refurbishing, recycling has a negative environmental impact. There's also evidence that this is just one that I had, but other authors, other scholars have their own data on this, that when there is recycling programs in place, people tend to consume more because they are under the impression that that recycling is effective, and they're under that impression because that's what we've been fed for generations from industry and governments. Of course, when we're talking about plastics, of course, this is particularly the case because plastics is another word for oil and gas. So plastics are produced by the fossil fuel industry. So 99.9% of plastics are derived from oil and gas. And, there's no doubt there's just an avalanche of evidence that Canadian oil and gas companies, as well as other companies, Shell, BP, et cetera, are trying to green fossil fuels through increased plastics recycling. But of course, plastics recycling requires virgin feedstock. It requires oil and gas. So if we increase plastics recycling, it means we're increasing oil and gas production. And if you look at this is just from Plastics Europe, their website. This is World Plastics Production Evolution, and as you see, post-consumer recycled plastics is very small, and bio-based plastics are even smaller compared to the mammoth generation of fossil fuel based plastics. So it's much more complicated than of course publics are led to believe. A really interesting report has just come out, which I highly recommend. It's called The Fraud of Plastic Recycling, and it's available online. And it shows things like that the Council for Solid Waste Solutions is actually a consortium of chemical companies like DuPont, Dow Plastics, Chevron, et cetera, and the fossil fuel industry, which create wonderful sounding organizations like the Plastics Recycling Foundation, Solid Waste Solutions, Plastics Partnership for Plastics Progress, and all of this is really just a veil for how to sustain the fossil fuel industry business as usual, and they use recycling as one of their absolute major tools, along with their other major tool, which is the transition phase to renewables, which we could talk about. So um, it another sort of really vital piece of the puzzle here is that marketing, and this, this neoliberal capitalist society working in tandem, really has given us this idea that that we can sort of consume our way out of risk. So globally, 17 to 20% of people are very significantly over-consuming, and around, 80% of people are on this planet are under-consuming. They need to consume more to sustain themselves. So, and I like Shaz's book, Shopping Our Way to Safety. And this is a quote from him, where he talks about sort of this sort of roughly 20% of the global population. They're a minority, but we buy ourselves out of our toxic environment. We believe that we've taken the care of the problem for ourselves. We buy these airnium masks that, for instance, Gwyneth Paltrow was very famous for photographing herself and posting it on Instagram on her private jet during the beginning of the pandemic. She had this airnium mask that's very expensive, and then you have to buy these filters. And so what we do is we protect ourselves and our loved ones from risk by consuming things, being prepared. And then we lose interest in whatever the sort of the public issue is, whether that's clean water, clean public water, or whether it's air pollution, or whatever the waste issue is. We sort of buy ourselves out of it. And then we of course we create this dual market, right? So there's the market for people who can afford it, like bottled water, and then there's this far diminished market for people who can't afford it. And so what this roughly 20% of the world's population is doing, with obviously variance, I'm speaking generally here, is that we are contributing unknowingly to the degradation of the planet, and of course to massive social injustice. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation now, which is to there are various ways in which people sort of respond to waste at the individual level, and I just want to try to clarify what I mean here. On the one hand, there is the kind of approach at the individual level, which is a sort of I'm doing my part. I buy green products, I recycle, I bicycle to work, whatever these things are, which Mannions, in his famous article, calls "Plant a tree, buy a bike, save the world." It is often it often comes with this sort of moral imperative, which is feelings of guilt and shame about sort of not doing enough at this individual level, not recycling well enough, not, I don't know, buying green enough because green products are too expensive, or whatever the reasoning is. So it comes with sort of guilt and shame, which is exactly what neoliberal capitalism wants, because it can feed off of that, it profits off that. And it comes with this sort of condemnation of others. I do this, but so-and-so, my neighbors, my partner, my children, my parents, my whatever it is, my colleagues, they're not really doing their part, right? So it gets us to sort of divide and conquer and focus on condemning other people. It also kind of, it's like that ecological footprint, like, I buy milk in returnable bottles. Oh, I'm also flying to, I don't know, I'm also flying to Corsica for a holiday, a well-earned holiday with my family or with my friends or whatever. A lot of this sort of responding to waste at an individual level is really promulgated by, what we might call self-care capitalism. This idea of, I'm using this L'Oreal commercial, because I'm worth it, which now is because we're worth it. which is this idea. And of course, self-care is limitless in terms of capitalism, right? It's a yoga mat, but it's also a yoga retreat. It's buying organic food, and it's buying the blender to make your organic smoothie. I mean, it's a limitless. This is, you know, capitalism's dream, because it's sort of limitless in how we need to take care of ourselves, and then, of course, take care of our loved ones, right? The other sort of individual level response, of course, is this sort of, you know, nothing I do matters. Like I can't do anything at all. It's there's no point in doing anything at all, because, you know, nothing on an individual level makes any difference at all. And so what I really want to say here is, you know, the whole argument of public sociology is really about making our way through those types of frames, and it's so this is how public sociology would sort of understand those sorts of frames. You know, individual behaviors, not recycling, but things like individual behaviors that involve reduction for that 20% of the global population. So refusing, reducing, reusing, refurbishing, you know, doing without conspicuous consumption, doing without anything that we don't need. This can help us to, well, first it helps the environment, of course it does, a small amount, but it helps, it doesn't hurt. And it helps us to remember, you know, what the actual cause is, what the actual problem is. Public sociology can also sort of help us to resist the lure of the techno fix, like, you know, we can keep buying all the clothes that we buy because we're about to invent biomaterials. And so, you know, like Stella McCartney, who makes some of her very expensive clothing and products out of fungi. And so, you know, we'll wear clothing made out of mushrooms, and then it'll be biodegradable, and then we can keep, you know, buying all the clothes that we buy. You know, these ideas of sort of waste to energy. Oh, well, look, you know, we burn all this garbage in it and it produces electricity. Like Sweden's really famous for this, right? As though this is a circular economy, when in fact it's linear. The idea that any of us can actually practice zero waste, you know, the idea that, you know, we just need to invent, you know, chemical recycling or whatever the techno fix is, and that this will techno fix our way out of the problem. Really, what it's about is connecting individual behaviors to larger, you know, community organizing, which really understands waste as a symptom of social injustice. That unless we work on these social injustice issues, we're not going to. We'll be dealing with. We'll continuously deal with the symptom, and not the cause. And that's really the argument that I try to make in the book, that these individual behaviors aren't wrong, but they need to be really brought together with larger community efforts that aren't directed at better recycling or whatever those things are, but are really that community organization that is really around social justice issues, like you know, clean water for all, and not just affordable clean water, as the UN has declared in its SDGs, but free, uncontaminated water. So I just want to thank everyone. I'll stop my share, and I don't know how long I've gone here, but hopefully we'll have some questions and have a great discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Myra. I need some time to digest what I heard from you. It was very insightful and also informative. Thank you so much. So now the discussion is open for our audience. And just please raise your hand if you have any comments or questions, and then you can yeah, you can say whatever you want. Yeah, I see Alicia.
Yes, so thank you very much, Myra. It's been very insightful and very interesting talk. And I must say that I'm really happy to hear waste, the theme of waste talked about in this way, and also recognizing issues around colonialism. And I would like to hear more about that, but maybe I will reach out for your book. And anyway, so my question regards really the closing of your talk. Because I completely agree with you about the aspect of social injustice related to the problem of waste, and many other problems related to ecological crisis. But I was wondering whether just framing the theme of ecological crisis or waste or whatever, whatever includes this issue in terms of social injustice and social inequalities might be somehow kind of might create a hierarchy of issues, meaning that we understand socio-ecological problems mainly in social terms rather than in socio-ecological terms. And I know that you have worked a lot on the theme of the more than human and so more than human relationalities. So I'm quite sure you have far more insightful perspectives on this. But yes, I was wondering how we manage to bring together issues of social justice and critique of social injustice with a more kind of, if we want, holistic view of how actually ecologies come in this structuring of social inequality or social injustices. So kind of trying to better integrate the material and ecological aspects into this reasoning. I'm sorry, it's not very clear because it's something that I'm kind of trying to articulate myself. But yes, kind of how do we build a more than human perspective on this issue? If you have ideas.
Yeah, no, thanks, Alice. That's a really great question. And indeed, in other work, I have tried to address this. So in the book before this one, Canada's Waste Flows, I have a chapter called Trash Animals. And so I sort of talk about animals. And I also have 3 chapters on the metabolism, the largely aerobic and anaerobic metabolism that takes place in open dumps and landfills. And I talk about I talk about ecologies of waste much more in these other places. Of course, what you're saying is absolutely right and really, really critical. And in my own work, when I say social, I understand that as not being necessarily human, social. But I recognize that when we say social, we tend to think in human terms. So I absolutely take your point, and I think one of the wonderful things about waste studies is that it 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 uh, it actually takes work to frame waste as an entirely human social phenomenon, because in something like waste, in its proclivities to flow and all of these things, and to contaminate, to be toxic, to, if we think of radioactive waste, medium and high level, to have this sort of, half-lives versus, for instance, some waste that's produced by mining companies like arsenic trioxide, which never has a half-life. It stays as toxic from when it is created to eternity. These materialities really, really shape the ways in which humans interact with waste and how they frame that waste. And it also speaks to, of course, the limitations of, for instance, when we're looking at disposal or recycling, which is sort of just above disposal. There are some real material limits to to what recycling can and cannot do. And so so yeah, I really take your point, and I'm sorry that I didn't sort of bring that to the fore, but rest assured, it is in my in how I understand that term, social, of the social justice and social injustice. Thank you.
Next question. Comment? I can put myself in the list. My question is about, I mean, it is not a very clear question probably, but my question is about the power relations that we have here. Because, you know, waste is not the only topic that individual behavior or effort is somehow ineffective for different reasons, because instead of focusing on the main culprit of the situation, the current situation, we just advise individuals to change their behavior, and as you said, not just in waste but also in renewable energy and also consumption levels. We most of the time we fail. You mentioned something that individuals, collective actions can be something meaningful here to change the game. But I was thinking, you know, within this power relations, in one side we have manufacturers, we have governments, we have money, and the other side, if we want to do a kind of community-based if we want to have a community-based role in these power relations, maybe we don't have enough resources to do that. So, but we believe in society still. I mean, we should do that. We don't have other choices to save the planet. We know technological development is not enough, and it should be a social change here. So in this power relation, with having much less power in compared to other actors of the game, what can we do? I mean, I know it is not an easy question, but do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question, Sarah. It's a great question, and there's a sort of a number of answers to it. So, waste research very clearly shows, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, there are nuances, of course, depending on what country or region we're talking about, but by and large, waste is gendered. In that 20%, the waste is gendered in the sense that women are largely, in heterosexual households, women are largely responsible for organizing the family around waste and recycling. It might be the man who takes the recycling out to the curbside or puts it down the chute in the apartment building, but it's the woman who is morally and physically tends to be responsible for educating any children in the household and for doing that waste. Women are also more likely to volunteer their time. This is what, the first George Bush Sr. called 1,000 points of light. He was like America's, I don't know, I can't remember what the preface was, but it was 1,000 points of light. Well, most of those points of light are women who volunteer their time, which then means that you have to be in a certain income bracket that you can volunteer your time, because you have to be above the level where you're working 3 jobs to support your children. So then we get into a bracket of, gendered individuals who are income secure enough that they can volunteer their time. And then, of course, neoliberal capitalism has already knows this extremely well. And organizations, available organizations, tend to be focused on this sort of individual level. So, communities of women who get together and help, they devise an educational program for school that schools can use to help children recycle, or, this sorts of thing, which Samantha McBride in her brilliant book, Recycling Revisited, calls busy work. It keeps us busy. we meet that, we check off that moral imperative. It's gendered. We don't really notice that. And certainly we don't do anything about it. And it keeps the system functioning. It doesn't disturb, as I say in the book, circuits of production, resource extraction and manufacturing. So the key is to do what we can individually, reduce things, reuse, refurbish, refuse, to the extent that we can, to the extent that we're so privileged that we can refuse things, that we can reduce things, that we can buy food that has no packaging or less packaging. I mean, I work in Canada's Arctic in Inuit communities, and their food is like 6 times more packaged. I'm pulling that out of a hat, but far more packaged than the food that I get here in Montreal, because all of their food is flown up or shipped up and comes with an immense amount of packaging. So, and it's 100% settler colonialism that means that food is shipped up and there's more packaging. That's a no-brainer for settler colonialism. So, that power, that sort of power framework absolutely determines that any kind of individual level response. So the sort of the key is to use that sort of individual response and connect it to organizations that are really looking at the source, that are really targeting fossil fuel industry, other resource extraction industries, and manufacturing to really take responsibility financially and otherwise for this injustice.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic to continue thinking and talking about this. Okay. If anyone else wants to say something?
Yes, I have a question, if I may, about public sociology. Is enough for us as sociologists to reframe argument, public argument, and try to discuss this topic as we are doing today, or rather we should actually change our positionality and trying actually to get involved in what we study? I mean, I would like to know what you think about actual research or the involvement of social scientists in this kind of issue. I mean, not just studying and writing and teaching, but also try to do something.
That is a fantastic question. So I got into waste studies really when it was sort of just when there was only a few people, Zuza Gill, and a few others who were working on this issue from anything other than, I mean, civil engineers have been working on waste for many decades, right? But in terms of the social sciences and humanities, it's a pretty recent field, actually. And up until pretty recently, most researchers in the social sciences and humanities, including sociology, have really focused on two main areas. One is waste pickers. So people who eke out survival by living on and working with open dumps, Mike Davis's Planet of Slums is an excellent book on that. But that was sort of one area where there was quite a waste of the world. Nikki Gregson's early Waste of the World project based in the UK. A number of those projects were really focused on that. The other big area, which still continues today, if you look at any journals like Waste Management or any of those kinds of journals, they are chock-a-block packed with social scientists doing studies on individual level behavior. And the typical one is you get through your ethics approval, and then you get some volunteer households, and you go in and they spread out all of their waste, not necessarily from the bathroom, but their kitchen waste and living room waste, etc., whatever, on some plastic bags, and you go through it with them, and they talk, they give stories around each piece of each material that they have discarded. So that sort of individual level, how do people live with their waste? How do people not live, attitudes and behaviors of individuals towards waste. Those two have really very highly dominated waste studies for a long time. It's only really much more recently, that we get, Josh Leposki's, Rubbish Revisited on electronic waste, the, Josh Reno's military waste, Shiloh Krupar's Hotspotters Report, which is an excellent book on how military and other contaminated bases and extraction industry and manufacturing, they get turned into recreational parks or ski slopes or whatever, like the one in Copenhagen. I can't remember what it's called, but that's now this sort of running thing. It's a ski hill. It's a waste to energy facility, and you can go and you can have like coffee at the top, or there's a restaurant or whatever. This sort of like Baudrillard's, simulacra, like we can techno fix our way, like, oh, look, this used to be a landfill, but now I'm skiing on it, kind of that. Though those kinds of studies are much more recent, and we need a lot more studies, research. We really need to move research in the direction of, resource extraction, manufacturing. The global flow of waste is a really under-researched area as well. Like how we're creating waste by moving goods and also waste around the planet, because we're moving a lot of waste around the planet as well. We're not just moving goods around the planet, we're also moving waste around the planet. So that sort of flows of waste is really under-researched as well. So there's a ton of areas that need more research, and we don't need any more research on, how can a family learn to recycle more? How can they teach their children to recycle better? We don't need any more studies on that, none whatsoever. We can close that book, we're good. And we really need to move on to really, really focusing in on, how do we, what's producing the most waste? How is it being produced? What's being done about it? And then how we can galvanize the kind of publics that we need to, because industry's not going to do it, and government only does it if publics force them to do it, or nudge them strongly to do it, right? So it's that part of the equation that we really need to focus our research on. And of course, it's very difficult. It's relatively easy to get into middle-class families in some kind of nice neighborhood to talk about how they teach their kids to recycle, and how they volunteer in their children's schools on the lunch program to try to do zero waste lunch. That's relatively easy. It's pretty easy. It's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get access to military bases, to get access to, the Alberta tar sands, etc. That's much harder, and it takes longer. So the shiny object is the former kind of research, but the real the real answers are in that other research, which is harder to do.
Sorry, I have a question if we have time. Are we still okay with time? Yeah. Thank you, Myra. It was a fantastic presentation. I took so many notes. It was really interesting to reframe the problem from what we normally see to what it actually is. And I think your presentation did that excellently, so thank you. And my question is about one of the last things you said about not focusing on technological fix, but on the social justice dimension of the problem of waste. And you mentioned at the beginning that there is also a link with colonialism that you've explored in another book. And I was wondering if you had a few moments to unpack this relationship in how I was really curious about that. What is the relationship between colonialism and social justice and public sociology, and how these two books dialogue with each other? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. So, there is, within, not necessarily within waste studies per se, but we do have a rich and increasing literature on environmental racism. So, we've really had that since the 1960s, if not before. So, I think the waste studies that looks at settler and colonialism really draws heavily on that kind of environmental racism foundation. My own work really draws very heavily on indigenous activists, authors, scholars, etc. I'm very the book Extracting Reconciliation is heavily indebted to Jody Wilson-Raybould, who was our first and only Indigenous Governor General in Canada, who parted ways very publicly with Justin Trudeau, who is our current Prime Minister. The book that Hillary and I wrote really it focuses on the Arctic, and it focuses on how the process of settler colonialism in all of its complexity, including laws, regulations, policies, practices, including things like the residential school system, the 60s scoop, all of these things, how they really coalesced to, one, identify some human beings as being waste themselves. Sir John A. Macdonald, our founding prime minister, very famously said that that we needed to kill the Indian in the Indian. And so there has been from the doctrine of discovery onwards, which the Vatican still refuses to repudiate. There is an explicit association between Indigenous peoples in Canada and waste, which morally justified the killing of Indigenous people, the violent taking over of land, and then using that land for resource extraction. So there's a long history there, but that's a really big part of it is identifying Indigenous people as waste and wasteable, as well as the land. The other part is about really teaching Indigenous people to waste. Part of settler colonialism and this and the sort of the forcing of Indigenous peoples to become to live as their colonizers has been really about transforming their societies into wasteful societies. So, before the Arctic was colonized, there was very little waste that was produced. And now Nunavut produces more waste than any other province or territory in Canada. And so there's this sort of dual process of, of certain humans as wasteable and waste, and then sort of the settler colonialism producing societies producing communities that produce waste as part of their induction into neoliberal capitalism. And so for me, it would be impossible to study waste issues in any any region or country that has been colonized. I've done some research with some colleagues in Nouvelle-Calédonie and New Caledonia, and you know, there are some similar things that have happened there. So it's impossible to talk about waste, to really understand waste, without understanding settler colonialism, because it's settler colonialism that has really produced these waste problems and crises in these regions. And so if, you know, without addressing the settler colonialism, you can't really, you're only going to address waste in terms that, you know, in these kind of dominant hegemonic forms, which is about individual behavior, it's about recycling, it's about taking responsibility, and all of that kind of stuff. So for me, those things are absolutely, you know, critical to put together in trying to understand waste.
Can I ask a question? Thank you, Myra. It was really interesting listening to you. Yeah, I also learned a lot. And I was thinking about this with, as you said, with like not focusing or having the framing on the individual, but rather on industries, or in particular maybe extractivism and those kind of industries. And I've been looking into mining recently, and in Sweden also we have this kind of possibly upcoming boom in mining now, also with all the new minerals and so that are needed for the demand of technology that you talked about, but also for the energy transition and the technologies relating to that. And then you have the industries using this as a motive, this social injustice aspect, saying that we need to do this, we need to do the extraction in Sweden and in Europe, rather than doing it in Africa or other countries. We can do it better here, and it's the right thing to do. But then, of course, the aspect of more that's from the global scale, say, but locally we have also the Sami people who get affected by extractivism in Sweden, and it's like you describe it, with the northern parts of Sweden, that is this land or the resources that you can do and that you can use and extract. So I was thinking about this tension of kind of doing it in the country or in Europe, and kind of taking the responsibility, making it cleaner, which is kind of a motive for continuing, but at the same time, this form of transformation or transition that we are then aiming for is still increasing the demand for consumption. It's not really a question, but I was just thinking maybe if you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, Monica, that's really excellent. For instance, in Canada, the fossil fuel industry in Canada, one of its major arguments for our kind of drill baby drill mantra here is that it's better to develop the fossil fuel industry and continue the fossil fuel industry in Canada, because in other countries it's less clean, it's less whatever. This has been absolutely shown to not be the case. The cleanest fossil fuels are really in Saudi, and what the tar sands in Canada are really dirty, and there is all kinds of just the research on it is just definitive. So it's really important to understand why governments are framing who they're addressing when they're framing this as, well, we'll take responsibility. In the past, we might have made these, you know, colonizing things where we were, you know, mining in Brazil and countries in Africa and whatever. And now we are going to take responsibility and we're going to drill in our own lands. It's really important to sort of look at that as a frame, and what is it accomplishing, right? It appears to tick that social justice box. And it's important to sort of look behind that as to you know, what's really going on there. It's a way to frame it as doing the right thing. The outcome, of course, is resource extraction, more resource extraction, right? So, and of course, it's not in any way to decrease the amount of resource extraction that is happening in colonized and settler colonized regions, right? It's not it's not about that at all. I mean, Canada is the #1 mining company in the world, region in the world, and we also, Canadian companies have more interests in other countries in the world than any other country in the world. So we're like the top mining. And you know, the fossil fuel industry that's, you know, largely, not but entirely, but in Alberta, isn't saying, well, we'll take everything, you know, we'll just leave other countries and we'll focus on Alberta. So we'll take responsibility for all that waste and contamination, which they don't do. But that sort of, that twisting of, you know, we're doing something good by digging up our own backyard, is pretty twisted. It's a frame that we need to really, we really need to analyze, and see it for what it is. And of course, it always goes along, I don't know about Sweden, but in Canada, it always goes along with, you know, this will create job opportunities. It will create opportunities for Indigenous people to upskill. And it's capacity building. And, you know, these are the engineers of tomorrow. You know, it always comes with these promises of like, how Indigenous people can be brought more into neoliberal capitalist society, and that, you know, they can become the engineers of tomorrow, and they can, you know, as though all of that is a really good thing. Like it's a no-brainer that the more Indigenous people can become educated in the colonizers' education, and the more they can upskill it within the colonizers' upskilling, you know, the better off they will be, because the more, of course, you know, assimilated they will be, right? So I don't know about Sweden, but in Canada, this kind of idea is there's an enormous pushback from Indigenous activists and scholars in Canada, a very strong one that cuts through all of that. But that's generally what companies and what territorial, provincial, and the federal government always repeats endlessly.
We have a few minutes, perhaps, for one more question.
I was just going to say, Monica, if you're interested in that, maybe you and I should do like a research study comparing Sweden and Canada. That could be interesting.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. Yeah.
Sorry, I just throw that out there.
Okay, I don't see any hands right up, so I think now we can wrap up our discussion. Thank you once again, Myra. It was really interesting talk, and I enjoyed and learned a lot by listening to you. And thank you, all of you, for participating in this excellent discussion. I hope we have more time to discuss the topic, and also to initiate kind of collaboration later. But for now, I hope you a very good morning, maybe morning in Canada, and also evening in Sweden. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you for all the questions. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.